Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Psychology and Spirituality, a bridge to a better life discussion. I'm your host, Marcia Trajano, and with me is Peter Hayes. Peter is the president of the Spiritist group Love and Light in Newark, New Jersey. It is so good to have you with us again, Peter. Love our conversations. And if you have yet to meet Peter or hear about Peter from Peter, please know that he has an amazing curriculum. He has contributed with over 60 episodes of the radio program Living Spring on Kardec Radio. He was also on the editing staff for the Spirits book that was published by the U.S. Spiritist Federation. And currently, he's serving in the board of directors of the U.S. Spiritist Federation and is an active participant in the Tri-State Spiritist Federation. Thank you so much, Peter. It's an honor to be here with you.
Thank you, Marcy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, awesome. But if this is the first time that you're watching us in this podcast like program, please note this is our weekly program that are a conversation based on the works by Joanna de Angelis. And we are here to create this safe space, this opportunity, right, Peter, to compare, to contrast, to correlate, but most importantly, to expand our own spirituality type of concepts with the psychological lens so that we can have a better insight about life and leading ourselves a better way of living. But today's episode that is brought to us by our friends at the Spiritist group Love and Light, right? And please go to their website if you want to know more at www.loveandlightnj.org. Also, please note that our program is sponsored by four organizations. They are AMI Brazil, the TV Mansão do Caminho, the International Spiritist Council, and the United States Spiritist Federation. Please subscribe if you haven't done so. And if you want to know more about what we do, check us out at spiritist.us. Also, feedback, comments, questions, critique, anything, let us know by putting your comments in the chat window. We'd love to hear from you and most likely come back in a different episode and bring up some of your questions. But we're here today, Peter, to discuss a an existential paradox of modernity, which is seeming versus being. And I want us to tease a little bit your thought processes, Peter. I wanted us to talk maybe about this idea of authenticity, of consciousness, of simply being. And I start because I was thinking about it before we came on air, just thinking about how in society today, the society that you and I and everyone else here
Mhm.
lives, we no longer perhaps define ourselves by what we do, right? Instead of hi, who are you? And in the past, and I keep thinking of Saint-Exupéry in the Little Prince, right, where he talks a lot about it. You don't talk about who you are; you talk about what you do. Yes, I'm Marcia, and I am, and you give your profession. That is passe, Peter, right? We no longer define about what we do. We don't even define ourselves by the car that we drive, the how large is our house, what is the degree that we have, but really we define by this mask that we create, this persona. We create something that's just absolutely hollow, right? It's ephemeral at best, but we invest a lot of our energy and we invest our energy to create it, but most importantly, to defend it with all our might. This is our egoic self, our
Mhm.
ego really creating something that you want to show that you are who you're not. But let's think about this paradox. First of all, the questions that come to my mind, Peter, are why do we even have to create a mask and mask ourselves from ourselves, which is quite interesting, right? Why do you even fall prey to your own masks? And what I thought before I give the mic to you, and my apologies for staying too much to talk about this, is what came to my mind, Peter, was the fact that today we live with the heavy influence of social media and influencers. And that has become the new norm. We either curate and edit how we look, how we behave, what we say, how we show up, right? And when we do this, we are probably hiding away our own existential problems, our own sense of emptiness. And I have to say, if we just start to think about it, right, it ranges from fads to makeup to
Mhm.
hair to body type.
Mhm.
Influencers, they are very good at influencing, and they cause this, let's say, copycat behavior,
Mhm.
which means there's a lot of people out there imitating one another. We are assuming identical postures, and we are really coming short, right? Coming out of this very short on a weakened sense of ideals, of ethics, and even our own individuality. As such, there is this dehumanizing. I want to put here because it's something that Joanna brings to us, this
Mhm.
dehumanizing equality. And when I read that, I go, Peter, what is Joanna talking about? Dehumanizing equality, which is we want to be equal, right? And I just think about it must be exhausting to stay relevant, to be an influencer, or to stay as a follower following the trends, right? We just spend all of our time looking what is the latest trend and what is the latest fad. How do I dress? How do I talk? How do I behave? And as Joanna even talks about this third group, which she calls this originals, uh, there is an increasing group of people that we can talk about, and this is really dates me, right? In my age in of the 70s and 80s, but the counterculture, either the hippies or I don't know, the punks and all of those countercultural types of movements, because they were led by this desire to shock and to be considered an original because of their exotic behavior and
Mhm.
perhaps scorn, right, of everything. I don't follow you, I am an original. But then if you bring it all about, it is all about hiding who you really are. So, Peter, tell us about what you think about this. Are we even able to get out of this vicious cycle? What do you think?
Well, I think to that question, yes, we can. To go back before the subject of influencers, when it comes to why do we have a mask in the first place? Well, there could be lots of reasons. I think part of it is fear, for certainly. Part of it can be that we all, based upon whatever experiences we have growing up, we're finding ways to cope, we're finding ways to adapt. And sometimes, depending on the environment we grew up in, especially if there was abuse, emotional, perhaps physical, and so forth, then we adapt certain ways of behaving that are a way of trying to cope so that we seek approval. And one reason to wear a mask is that we think we're pleasing other people by appearing to be a certain way. However, if it comes across as being inauthentic, and it probably will on a deeper unconscious level, if our behavior comes across as being inauthentic and people pick up on that,
Yeah.
they're liable to resent us. Maybe
Mm.
they even hate us for it. Who knows? But when we, I mean, there are lots of ways to think about that. But like if we pretend to be very calm and very serene, as if we're, Mr. New Age or something like that, um, what if there's something else going on beneath us that we're not connecting to? Maybe we're afraid of anger that we might have. Maybe we're suppressing anger in one way or another. And so we put on a mask. That's one example. Um, if we are obsessed with, in being influenced and
Hmm.
wanting to be um, trendy, I guess, shop till you drop, that kind of thing. Um, Some of that may be that we just feel like we are identifying with a group, that we want to feel like we're a part of a group.
Yes.
Because if we
Yes.
feel like we're alone and isolated, that's an awful feeling. And I was reading, I'm in the middle of a very interesting book now by Jordan Peterson called 12 Rules for Life. And
Hmm.
he's a psychologist. And he does mention, among many things, how many people are alone. I mean, really alone. And when we don't have a chance to really talk and express ourselves to somebody, it, it, the consequences of that can be really serious in terms of our own happiness, our self-esteem, the way it affects us. And so maybe the fixation on influencers is in part a way of trying to fit into a group, to feel like we're accepted. Because
Not
again,
no longer alone, right, Peter? No longer alone.
no longer alone. Exactly. Because if we don't feel like we can express ourselves in some capacity to somebody that we know, to somebody close to us, perhaps, then maybe one way to compensate for that would be to feel like, okay, I'm part of this group because I'm wearing these clothes this week, or I'm, doing my hair this way. Not that I have much hair, but but any type of influence, so to speak.
Can I
Um,
add something else, Peter,
yeah,
before you move on? Because what you're talking about in terms of that inauthentic self, right,
yeah,
which is this seeming. Yes, even when you have a group of editors and advisors and
mhm,
all of really sophisticated, well acted upon, it's inauthentic and you know it, right? You create that internal churn that at some point it's going to come up. I even think almost like a volcano, right, where underneath this calm let's say ocean, and at some point the tectonic plates will collide and explode, and all that pressure is going to come out to relieve all that's going underneath. And I think it's important for us to be aware of it, regardless of how well we mask ourselves from ourselves. At
right,
some point we will erupt in some sort of a mental and physical I'm not sure what's the best term, unwell being, right? We're not well. But one of the things that I wanted to bring to you, and I bring to you because we talked a couple of episodes ago about the notion of inner silence, right? And many people believe, and you and I and all of you who are here today may fall trap into the idea that inner silence is, okay, I'm going to meditate.
Okay.
Joanna de Angelis tells us, right? Meditate, pray, gather yourself in the place of solitude, if you will.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is that many of us don't even know what the true meditative state is.
Hmm.
We end up meditate because the doctor tells you, Marcia, you need to meditate 15 minutes a day because you're too anxious. And I go and I'm like, oh, I can't, I'm exhausted for meditating, versus that a very good place to be. And that inner silence, if you will,
Hmm.
should be, in my opinion, based on what I've read of Joanna de Angelis, for example, is to silence all of that, the influencing,
Hmm.
the being a follower or trying to be an original, whatever the subgroup we fall into, but also silence the anxieties, silence the worries, silence all of these external inputs that come to us, and take away our sense of peace, our sense of balance, our inner peace, right?
Well, perhaps one of the things we may discover in our attempts to engage in inner silence is that
Mhm.
maybe we just need to sleep more, because I imagine many of
Yeah.
us are chronically under rested. And part of that can be too much of the racing of the mind in general. Sleep experts recommend, by the way, that we should get at least 7 hours, 8 hours of sleep, maybe even more at times. But that, so, how can one meditate if one is exhausted? I mean, it might happen, but it might also lead, we may discover just how tired we really are. And
Mhm.
as far as the inauthentic self is concerned, one way of expressing that can also be that we make
Mhm.
ourselves so habitually busy. And in this
Yes.
day and age, it's very easy to do that. I'm rather guilty of that myself. But we make ourselves so habitually busy that we don't have time for that inner silence. Because
Yeah.
if we did make time for that, God forbid, we might actually have to be with ourselves. But of course, that's actually a wonderful thing. I'm being a little facetious here,
Mhm.
but people who want to make themselves habitually busy are probably avoiding something.
And I think that, as someone who is an example of that,
Mhm.
including workaholic behavior, strong workaholic behavior, and a lot of time trying to move away from that myself. But I think it's good for us to think about why,
Mhm.
right? Why is it so easy to fall prey into defense mechanism or escape mechanisms, such as workaholic behavior or busy, right? If you have busy, I don't have to think about it. And from that perspective, perhaps being in front of TV at the end of the day, when
Yeah.
you're absolutely, there's nothing left in you,
Mhm.
is a way to just, I don't want to think about it, right? This is
Thrown out. Yeah.
right, but I can zone out, versus the silence of the non-TV, which is I now am somehow facing the mirror, if you will. I'm facing myself. I'm
Mhm.
facing what, and I don't know if you want to talk to it. What is, can we talk today about this idea of consciousness?
Well, one question I was just thinking of is, how do we learn to really be with ourselves? And who in the world are we? Well, that's a different, the answer to that, I mean, every one of us would have a different experience with that if we begin to try to tap in a little bit more to who we really are. And it can be very difficult to do that. It may be something very fearful. Maybe we wouldn't like some of who we are. But this actually leads to a very important point. We cannot connect to our higher selves until we've connected to our lower selves. To act as though we're going to go through life and not connect to our negativity in some way and acknowledge it's there, acknowledge that maybe we even like it sometimes. Before we can connect to a higher self, we have to be mindful of all that. Not just mindful, but connect to it in some way, in a safe way. And what I mean by that is, all of us, I think, have experiences that are very painful and difficult to confront. But do we have the courage to do it? Because Joanna de Angelis is stressing frequently the importance that we know ourselves, that we connect to ourselves, that we, as you said before, we connect to our authentic selves. And how can we do that if we don't acknowledge and also confront, to some extent, maybe a lot, but confront our negative selves as well, our negativity?
Can you
It,
talk a little bit more about that? What is that negativity? Because it's important, as you mentioned, in the
okay.
works not only of Joanna de Angelis, but this whole plethora of schools of thoughts regarding not only psychology but also spirituality. Can you tell
Well,
us there that?
negativity can mean a lot of things. Maybe
Mhm.
we like to control other people. Maybe we like to dominate. Maybe maybe we're jealous of certain people and we wish we could get them out of the way. Um, maybe we have violent urges. Maybe we sometimes really want to hit somebody, that kind of thing. All feelings that if we acted upon them, we would not be proud of ourselves and we could get ourselves into a lot of trouble. But there may be more subtle ones, like maybe we want to sabotage the relationships we're in, or we're afraid of success in some way, or um, we have. I mean, a lot of people have prejudices within them, which, again, if it came out to the surface, they might be very afraid and uncomfortable to acknowledge that. Um, I think that, I mean, there's lots of ways to think about what negativity could be, and I feel like I'm just touching on a few of them. Um, but anything that really has to do with our animalistic nature. Uh,
Hmm.
Now, our animalistic nature is not necessarily something we should run away from either. I mean,
That's who we
how
are, right? That's what our legacy, if you will. That's
yeah,
what our heritage, if you will. Yeah.
correct. It is our heritage, and when we try to be more spiritual, whatever that might mean, to somehow deny that we are animals,
Yeah,
um,
that's a good point here,
you know,
right?
we're not we're again not connecting to our heritage, as you said, our evolutional heritage. Aggression can be done positively, for instance, in certain ways. And in order to do that, um, we need to be able to connect to more of our animal like selves. And by aggression, I mean that we're able to stand up for ourselves, we're willing to confront. Now, when I say confront, I don't mean being hurtful and violent or anything like that, but simply having enough self esteem, enough positive ego that
Hmm.
we don't tolerate certain forms of behavior when those behaviors should be confronted.
Yeah. So on one hand, having filters
Mhm.
to control ourselves as
Yeah.
organism within a society, right? As social beings, that's one thing. The other
Mhm.
thing is the fact that we do have an animalistic
Mhm.
dimension as well as a spiritual dimension. We
Mhm.
are we are immortal beings, and as such, we have a very strong spiritual side, but we also have this animalistic side that is important to us, and from an instinct, a lot of, if you read about, we see a lot of discussion on instinct being the very basis, right, of humanity. What I mean by that is this very primitive part of who we are as human beings, but are instincts necessarily bad?
Are instincts bad? No. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
instincts help us to survive
Mm-hmm.
because if we didn't have instinct at all, how would we perceive danger, for instance?
Yeah,
So, um, our instincts, well, if our instinct is to be impulsive and violent, obviously that's not so good, but suppose we have an instinct to be caring. Maybe what about the parental instinct to protect and nurture, for instance, or the instinct to help somebody? Um, we see somebody who's suffering or got hurt, and our instinct might be, how can I not stop and help this person rather
yeah.
than keep walking.
Yeah, we
Uh,
can talk a lot about compassion. I believe there is a book. Oh, it's maybe 2 decades old book by the Dalai Lama that I think it was the Spiritual Revolution. I believe this is, I'm bringing from memory, where he talks a lot about the instinctive nature of compassion.
mhm.
So it's very cool if we think about it, right? So we are compassionate, yeah, but not just us. If you look into uh, nature, right? And let's go to the wild animals in the African savanna, and we see that, as you mentioned, the parental instinct, that instinct to preserve.
Right.
Nevertheless, we're no longer that caveman or the man that runs against those animals, and yet our instincts to protect, to help us with the survival of who we are as an individual, but also the race, is can be interesting enough an impediment for our own growth and evolution as spiritual beings, right?
Yeah, I mean, animals operate on instinct, and that's primarily what they do. And we have that impulse as well, but of course, we have all kinds of complex emotions and analytical abilities and discernment and so forth that allow us to make all kinds of choices based on that. Um, so going back to animals, animals will raise their young and they'll be caring and nurturing, but once the responsibility is accomplished, the parent animal may very well go on to a completely different life with others and abandon the young, but humans don't do that.
Yeah, yeah. At least not all humans, right?
Under normal, we
um,
stay in contact, yeah, with others
yeah.
up
But can
until.
we pivot a little bit? I know you work a lot with spiritism, right? And as president and active worker in different organizations, can you tell us a little bit about how Joanna, in her book The Conscious Being, right at the beginning, she really brings very strongly the aspects of spiritism that can help us understand our sense of self, our sense of authenticity in all that we are, meaning this immortal being that brings with ourselves our own heritage, our own past past existence, and all that we created. Can you talk a little bit about it, Peter?
Well, if spiritism stresses that we are here to try and be better versions of ourselves. And part of what that means is that since spiritism stresses the immortality of the soul and stresses that we do come back, reincarnation, we therefore are here to learn. And with reincarnation in mind, it makes a difference as to why we are here or how we experience life, and that everything
Beautiful. Yeah.
we go through is an opportunity to learn. We learn through the bodies we're in, we learn through the families we're in, we learn through the challenges that we face, just moving around the physical world. There's all kinds of learning to be done in all of that. And since Spiritism, the purpose of studying Spiritism and trying to put it into practice is for us to be better versions of ourselves, to try to understand better who we are. It's very connected to psychology that way, because certainly psychology stresses, as probably one of the most fundamentally important goals, is for us to know ourselves, to have more consciousness about who we are, and to understand a little bit more about maybe where we've been, what our past is. Uh, a lot of, like, Freudian psychology, if I'm not mistaken, will stress that a lot of times we're carrying the past within us now. So if we just look at a single lifetime, whatever we're going through now is in many ways a reflection of what we were experiencing when we were younger.
So
So the
young,
past,
so trauma of our youth, right?
the
Or
trauma of
childhood.
our youth, I mean, it can be the trauma of our youth. It can maybe be, hopefully, some positive things too. But whatever it is, it's part of who we are now. So it's the present of the past, or the past is in the present. And, but it's also, from what we remember of the past, is our memory reliable? Not necessarily. We're
Hmm.
probably not remembering many things. We're always filtering how we process our past. And then there's also, what are we internalizing unconsciously? What are we carrying around with us that we're not so aware of, that we maybe, well, that we took in when we were very young, for instance.
Hmm.
I mean, just one example is, in the first 2 years of a child's life, the bonding with the parent is really, really important. And depending on the nature of that bonding, it can have a big influence on them in adult life. Now, if somebody did not have good bonding, that does not mean necessarily that they're condemned to struggle with bonding as adults. But it can also mean that as an adult, if someone didn't have very good bonding in childhood, they may struggle. Um, People can be both affected by these things, but we can be more resilient than we give ourselves credit for, too. And going back to the subject of authenticity, wearing a mask, and so forth, that would be another reason, difficulties with bonding, because we may,
Hmm.
if we're seeking acceptance, maybe we didn't learn very well how to seek acceptance, or we're terrified of rejection. Um,
Why
if
is
we
it so
don't,
hard, Peter, to
Mhm.
accept who we are? Why is it so hard to, and I don't know that you have an answer to that. I'm just thinking
Right.
aloud here.
Yeah.
The complexity in our own way of understanding what love is, right? And we can go through an entire discussion on the historical definitions of love, right? Very much materialistic, possessive, etc., versus the agape, that love that Jesus was an example, a pure example of this
Yeah.
unconditional love, all accepting love despite all that we are and all of our foibles, if you will,
Mhm.
that the love exists. But why is it so hard for us to accept that, to love like that, to be loved like that?
why is it so hard for us to be to feel like we are loved
Yeah, and to be able to love, right?
and to love?
Yeah.
Well, again, bonding can be a big reason for that. That it's if we don't feel like we are loved. I mean, one of the most important things parents can do for their children is to send the message that they love their children unconditionally. Their children
Mhm.
may be major pain in the necks, but and hopefully parents are learning how to set boundaries with their children so that they're not such big pain in the necks. But but even so, if it's a little bit like when a small child is not behaving well, we respond one way to that versus an adult who's not behaving well, right? We're a lot less sympathetic to an adult misbehaving than we are a small child. Doesn't mean that small child shouldn't be held accountable in an appropriate way at a level that child can understand. But um, in setting those kinds of boundaries, um, who was it? Mr. Rogers. Um, Mr. Rogers talked about setting loving limits with children. And I think what he was getting at is you do need to set limits, of course. There are times when children behave in ways that they need, you know, to have some limits set. But if it's done in a loving way, then it's a way of sending the message that I love you, I still care about you, even though
Yeah.
you're not allowed to do what you're doing, or even if you're unhappy that you cannot have that ice cream right now, um, and things like that. When we feel that we've got that foundation of love, then it's a whole lot easier to cope. Going back to fears of rejection. Well, rejection is very hard, but if we have a sense of who we are, even if we are rejected by somebody, we don't fall apart as a result. Sure, we may feel badly and so forth. It's like if one's dating and they get rejected by this person or that person. Okay, that's not fun to go through. But if we have a sense of who we are, if we're connected to our truer self, are we able to, get through that rejection and move on rather than be devastated and feel like I'm no good, I have nothing to give anybody, I'm going to give up, and so forth.
So we can talk a little bit about perhaps the ego, right? The strong ego,
Right.
which is what we need as a foundation to protect who we are.
Right.
And when we talk about the bonding of the child with their parents in early childhood, but also the entire structure of through life to have that strong ego structure being formed and support you in your sense of self.
Right.
But the issue that we have is when we let the ego drive all of our responses to the external inputs. And what we mean by that is, I guess we talked about this before, perhaps, Peter,
Mhm.
when we met previously, where there are many emotions out there. There are four basic emotions: joy, sadness, anger, um, and, and fear, right? And they're there to help that human being in a very instinctive manner react to external inputs, either threats or that bonding. In case of joy, right, you emote, you have those emotions as a response to what comes from outside in.
Right.
And the thought process here perhaps is that um, as we get angry, let's say you mentioned, right, anger as a defense mechanism to a threat, and you right? You
Yeah.
have that fight or flight, almost immediate reaction to protect who you are. And the thought here is, let's think about ourselves in the idea of this existential paradox of seeming versus being,
Hmm.
in terms of what is it that is creating that response mechanism? Is it you are protecting your ego,
Hmm.
right? And then because of it, the egoic masks and the egoic behaviors and the egoic constructs of that curated idea of this is Peter and he is this, that, and all of those attributes that you have invested your entire lifetime to be a respected member of society, somebody who's intelligent, somebody who is compassionate, whatever may be that you identify yourself as. But so long they are a mask, there's something underneath that is really making you unhappy. And I'm talking about you, but I'm talking about myself and everybody else here with us today. It is the sense of, unless we understand that yes, it's okay to be angry, it's yes, it's okay to be sad or afraid, etc. It's okay. But let's take the time to understand, if I am angry, let's not mask that anger with hi, right? That very yes, that inauthentic
Yeah.
mask of niceness when I am angry. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm angry. Peter, I am angry. Okay, I am angry. So why am I angry? And then we have that journey, that invitation that Joanna brings to all of us. That invitation, and it's pretty much in all of her body of work as well as the Spiritist body of work, a Spiritist literature, or in the sense of let us look, embark in this journey that takes a lot of courage to look inside and confront those emotions, those
Yeah.
feelings.
Because looking inside and confronting those emotions is not does not mean or shouldn't mean that we're going to become permanently swallowed up by them.
Yes.
And we have to be able to understand that any of these feelings that we may have, happiness, sadness, fear, etc.,
Hmm.
they're temporary. We have lots of different emotions from one moment to the next, and anything that we're going through, it may be challenging, but it's not like we're going to be there for all eternity. And in fact, we may be a lot better off if we're allowing ourselves to experience things like anger. So, and you're right. Joanna de Angelis does say that, and so do psychologists in general, that anger is normal and
Hmm.
anger is okay. The question, though, is how do we find ways to express anger that are not, explosive to the point of being violent and hurtful and things like that? Because let's say we have, I mean, just as an example, let's say we're in a relationship and the person we're in a relationship with has done something to make us angry. Not that that ever happens, of course, but can we find a way to talk about it that is not um, meant to score points and hurt and abuse? Can we find a way to talk about it where we're expressing how we react to something, but we're not just really dumping on that person? Because there is the next day and the next day and the next day after that if we're in a serious relationship. So we always have to be mindful about, there's going to be that tomorrow. So let's try to, but well, an important point. I I'm going to pick on spiritists just a little bit here, but sometimes I encounter people that seem to be a little afraid to confront, we must elevate our thoughts. We must, thought is everything. We must always have good energy, positive vibrations. Well, yes, that's true, but if it's not, then what foundation is that really on? Is that on a foundation of authenticity, or is it on a foundation of fear and avoidance? Because if
And
it's the latter, then you know.
yeah, and it's very important because when we talk, and we don't have the time to go into it, Peter,
Yeah,
but when
yeah.
we start to talk about projections and
Mhm,
complexes and even
right.
archetypal behaviors,
Mhm,
right? We fall prey into an idealized behavior. Okay, I'm a mother,
right.
therefore the idealized version of what a mother may be, not only culturally, in terms of my family subculture, my regional subculture, the Western subculture, versus the in entire world of that idealized version of
Mhm,
being a mother. And when that does become incompatible to my feelings, we start to have dealing unconsciously or even subconsciously conflict with ourselves, right? And we repress who we are, we repress how we're feeling, and boy, that starts the journey of that seeming, that behavior of I'm not going to be authentic to myself, I'm not going
mhm,
to explore the lack of synchronicity between what I expect of myself and how I am capable of living that role of a mother in this case, right? And I keep thinking there's so many roles out there, there's so many idealized versions of what we should be, and of course this changes through time. The the idealized mother of 500 years ago, or
mhm.
even perhaps 100 years ago or 50 years ago, is not the same of today,
Sure.
where in the West, most women have joined the workforce, and they're not with their children, they're not caretakers. For those of you who are, thank goodness that life has allowed you to be with your children, right? But more and more women and men are out there, hence their children are dealing with a different type of childhood than maybe 10 years, 50 years ago. But
Sure.
with that, I think we we should really look into this beautiful invitation to be loving,
Mhm,
to understand our animalistic as well as our spiritual dimensions, to
mhm.
understand that we do bring instincts, but they are not bad. They're just part of who we are. And those instincts are here to protect us, such as those basic emotions. They're there to help us survive
Mm,
whatever threat, perceived or real, is there, in that we should look every time I am behaving.
mhm,
Let's think about, am I being original? Am I being a follower? Am I being an influencer? But why?
mm.
Let us focus on being, and that's my invitation. Any final words, Peter, on onto this topic to those who are here with us today?
If we really want to influence anyone, then I would say the best way we could do that is be as authentic as we possibly can be. And that also includes having the courage to sometimes not look so good. Maybe we make mistakes or we behave badly, but we acknowledge
Fail, right?
we
Fail
fail
fast. Yeah, fall apart.
on our
Yeah.
faces.
Hmm.
I mean, as someone who plays guitar and has done it in front of people from time to time, I've certainly had the experience of completely falling apart, and it's not fun. But you know, the rule there, so to speak, the rule is keep going. You know, don't just like, oh man, but just keep, kind of get yourself through it. Yeah, I messed up. All right, but just keep moving. It's not denial, but it is having the courage to, okay, I didn't look so good there, I guess, God forbid what people might think of me, that kind of thing. So going back to the subject of wearing a mask, if we're terrified of what people might think of us, then wearing a mask can be very tempting, but we pay a big price for doing that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let us all have the courage
Mhm.
to identify if and when we wear those masks, what those masks are, and start to remove them,
Right.
become naked with ourselves and all of the flaws,
Mhm.
all of the the failures, the tentative acts, all that we actually overcome, and by facing and becoming who we are, we actually become better, we evolve. But with
Absolutely.
that, I want to say thank you, Peter, for being with me today. Thanks
Thank you.
everyone
Mhm.
who's here with us today, and I'll see you next time. Thanks everyone.
Thank you, everybody.